Hey, how's it going, my wolf pack? It's Wolfmaster here, and I'm coming at you with a Vanguard deck profile. This time I'm going to be showing off my Narukami deck. Last week I managed to get first place at my locals thanks to this deck. It is called Hauringu Rakurai, which is Japanese for Howling Thunderbolt, because, you know, I'm a Wolfmaster. And with Narukami, I bring the thunder. So yeah, this Narukami deck focuses on Dragonic Vanquisher and the Vanquisher Stride. Alright, it relies on binding everything on your opponent's, in your opponent's, like, drop zone and on in their field, so you can basically just power up with the boss card. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into this. Okay, first up is my starter is Wild Run Dragoon. I'm trying to get it into the camera here. Here we go. Its skill is you can put it into the soul and your opponent chooses a card in their drop zone and binds it face up. Then you can choose one of your other units, and at the end of the turn they get Thunderstrike 2, which means the ability is active if your opponent has 2 or more bound cards. That unit gets an extra 5,000 power, so that is pretty good, and it helps me just bind stuff in my opponent's drop zone when I need to. Alright, next up, my trigger lineup right now. I have 2 Plasma Dance Dragons. Critical trigger. I'm currently using these until I can get 2 more copies of the next critical, which is 2 Malevolent Djinn. Its skill is you put it into the soul and then choose a Narukami unit, and it gets an extra 3,000 until the end of the turn. And then 4 copies of Lightning of Triumphant Return Resif. His ability is that if I have a grade 3 or higher Vanquisher Vanguard and it attacks, I can send him to the soul, and then I can draw a card and add 5,000 power to my Vanguard until the end of that battle. And then I have 4 stand trigger in the form of Dragon Dancer Vieni. I think that's how it's pronounced. Its skill is that when an opponent's rearguard is put into the drop zone, you can send this card to the top of your deck, and if you do, you can shuffle, draw a card, and then unflip a card in your damage zone. So that helps out a lot, considering I don't run draw triggers in this deck. And yeah, it helps me recycle my counterblasts for later. And then finally, 4 heal trigger in the form of Deity of Love Kama. Sorry. Deity of Love Kama. Alright, that's the grade 0, so let's move on to the 1 lineup. First of all, I have 4 PGGs. Is Dragon Dancer Anastasia. Its skill is, you discard a card. When you guard with it, you discard a card from your hand, and your Vanguard can't be hit. And if you have a copy of it in the drop zone, then you unflip a damage. Then, next up, I have 4 Mighty Bolt Dragoon. Skill is, when it's called to the rear guard, you choose a grade 3 in your hand and reveal it. And then you can search your deck for a card with Vanquisher in its name. It has to be grade 3 or higher, and you add it to your hand. And then you discard a card from your hand. And the other one is, it counts as a grade 3 when you stride. So that helps, considering this deck focuses on Vanquisher, and I want to be able to ride Vanquisher, like, that's like the main grade 3 I want to get into. And then next up, I run 4 Chain Bolt Dragoon. Its skill is whenever an opponent's rear guard is put into the drop zone due to the effect of one of my cards, and if I have a grade 3 or higher Vanquisher Vanguard, my opponent chooses a card in their drop zone and binds it, and then I can choose another unit to give 2,000 power to until the end of the turn. So that really helps out. Like, I love having 2 of these guys on the field and then striding while I have Vanquisher on, because then I can just like bind like 3 cards at once. And then lastly, for the grade 1s, I run 2 Rising Phoenix. Its skill is Soul Blast 2 and then draw 1 card. So that helps a lot, and that's like the main reason why I'm looking for 2 more Malevolent Djinns, because I have another card in here that Soul Blasts. So yeah, that helps. Alright, now let's move on to grade 2s. First up, 4 Voltage Horn Dragon. Its skill is Generation Break 1. When this unit attacks a Vanguard and it's boosted, you can counterblast 1, and then your opponent chooses one of their rear guards, retires it, and then binds that card face up. And then this one right here is pretty much the pressure card of the deck, is 4 Demonic Dragon Berserker Chatra. Its skill is like 1, it can attack rear guards, and its other skill is that during your turn it gets plus 3,000 power, and if it hits the opponent's Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, draw a card, and then bind a card in their drop zone. So yeah, that's really, really good. And then finally, for my grade 2s, I'm running 3 Rock Climb Dragoon. Its skill is Generation Break 1, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. If I have a grade 3 or higher Vanquisher Vanguard, then my opponent chooses one of their rear guards, retires it, and then binds it, and this gets an extra 2,000 until the end of the turn. Alright, now moving on to grade 3s. First up, 4 of the backup. Grade 3 is 4 Blitz Spear Dragoon. Its Generation Break 1 skill is that when it's on the Vanguard circle and it attacks the Vanguard, this gets an extra 2,000 power for each card in your opponent's bind zone until the end of that battle. And its other skill is that when this card is placed onto the Vanguard circle, you can Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and then your opponent chooses one of their rear guard, you choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the front row and bind that card face up. So yeah, he's good, but he's not really the card I want to ride. This one here is the card I want to ride. 4 Dragonic Vanquisher. This card right here is just awesome. I love his artwork. His first skill, Generation Break 2. Whenever your opponent's card is put into the drop zone due to an effect by one of your cards, he gets an extra 3,000 power and plus 1 critical. So he's basically the generation version of Eradicator Gauntlet Buster Dragon, and you don't need 4 damage in order to use that skill. And his other skill is that when you stride on top of him, you can Counterblast 1, and if you do, you choose one of your opponent's cards in the front row and bind it face up. And that's awesome. This guy right here is the main focus. Is just bind, bind, bind. Alright, and now that the main deck has been shown, I'm going to show off the strides. First up, 2 Lightning Dragon Knight Zorus. Its skill is when its attack hits the Vanguard, your opponent chooses one of their rear guards and retires it, and then you can choose 2 cards in your opponent's drop zone and bind them face up. So not only does this help with the deck's theme, but it puts a lot of pressure on my opponents. Then I run 2 Conquering Supreme Dragon, Conquest Dragon. Its skill is once per turn, you can choose a face-down copy of this card in your G zone, flip it face up, and then if the number of cards in your G zone is 2 or more, choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the front row, retire it, and then all your units in the front row get 5,000 power for each open rear guard circle in your opponent's front row. So combine that with Vanquisher here, like that gets rid of 1 rear guard, and then his skill, get rid of the other one, add 10,000 to the front row. And finally, the boss card of the deck, the reason why I made this deck, for Conquering Supreme Dragon, Dragonic Vanquisher Voltage. This card right here is just great, and it's just crazy. Its skill is that once per turn, you can choose a copy of this card in your G deck, flip it face up, and then it gets these 2 abilities here. One is that when it attacks the opponent's vanguard and it hits, then your opponent chooses one of their rear guards to retire, and then you choose 2 cards in their drop zone and bind them, and he gets this awesome skill, Continuous Generation Break 3. During your turn, all units in your front row get plus 3,000 power for each card your opponent has bound. So imagine if you use this deck and you bound 10 of their cards. I mean, the most I got at the tournament was about like 8, I believe. But yeah, imagine if you bound 10 of their cards, just add 30,000 to the front row. Like, that is just crazy. So yeah, this deck is the one that got me my first place ever. My first ever first place, and I won this playmat because of this deck. Like, it's a lot of fun. I really like it. Like, I don't know what else to say about it. Like, this deck is just awesome. Like, I love it so much. But, yeah, anyway. Thank you for tuning in and watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm sorry, let me do that right. Be sure to break ride, Legion Mate, and stride that like button, because all that stuff is great for the Vanguard. And if you want more Vanguard content, be sure to subscribe to my channel to become a member of the Wolf Pack today. So, thank all of you guys, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Ow!